Welcome everyone. Today we're doing a kind of a next step episode after Daniel and I spoke about emotions previously. We're doing an episode on what's called primary and secondary emotions and digging in a little bit more related to why emotions exist, but some of those kind of more hairy layers or complications that happen regarding accessing emotions and processing emotions properly. Before we do that, I've got two things we need to do. One is I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. And today we're recording this episode on the lands of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. The other thing I'd like to do is wanted to quickly recommend a podcast I think everyone will love and is would be interested in. At Safe Place, we do a lot related to emotions and digging into that. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please check out Talking to Teens. So this has got expert advice for navigating the complicated world of teenage mental health. They explore issues like perfectionism and self-hate through conversations with specialists who offer practical communication strategies for parents. And that's what I love about podcasting, and I think the general need out there in the counselling space or mental health space is actually giving listeners and clients tools that they can walk away and try. It's like getting another perspective on many of the topics we discuss here, but focus more specifically around teens if you have a teenager that you're working with. You can find it at talkingtoteens.com and really think that you'll get a lot out of it if that's something that you want to delve more into, quite a specific way. But here we are, we're going to jump into our episode related to primary and secondary emotions. My name is Stuart Cheverton and I'm a mental health social worker and one of the owners of Safe Place Therapy. And today we've got Daniel di Pietro back. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Stu. Glad to be back.
Yeah, that was a bit of a mouth jumble I was just saying there. But another thing I don't think I've shared with you yet, I'm not sure, but
Oh,
we've done a few episodes now and wanted you to know that your sexology video is kind of one of the top viewed. So that's
oh, wow.
yeah,
Amazing. That's
pretty
great. And it's
cool.
great that everyone feels like that they can attune to that and I guess find that interesting facts around that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and sex sells, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out to you. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you haven't listened to the sexology episode or any of the episodes, please jump on, feel free, and maybe
Mm.
just scroll through and see maybe one or two that you might enjoy and give it a whirl, give it a test out. We're planning on throwing out an episode each week on many different topics, but if there's a topic that you want us to cover, please comment, like this episode if you like this information. But we're really kind of putting ourselves out there to talk about issues, give advice and tools, and encouraging people to start talking more about mental health. So yeah, let's jump in. So maybe if you talk a bit of a recap about why emotions exist and
Mm.
my little thing that I bring up with clients is uh, you're in a jungle, big scary monster comes out of the jungle, and adrenaline rushes through your body. That's called fear, right? So
Mm.
there's
Yes.
something big and scary coming to chase me.
Mm.
So either I adrenaline rushes through my body and I run and hide, to kind of run from that danger, or I beat that monster up because, also fear is running through my body, or I might even shut down sometimes. And there's a few different other ways that fear happens or does to us internally, and
Yeah.
then we're pushed towards an action or an action tendency.
Mm.
Let's think of a different example. I'm at a supermarket and someone, I don't know, steals something from my trolley. I run and chase them because that's my thing. I just bought it,
Yeah.
right? So I'm
Yeah.
angry. There's something
Yeah.
something fueling me to do that.
Mm.
So
Mm.
a shitty thing happens in life or a good thing.
Yeah.
We have a reaction. Our body bubbles up with this energy that, stirs us up. And then that pushes us towards an action or it pushes us towards communicating an issue or something.
Yeah.
And then if all that works out, if we kind of follow that loop through, hopefully we survive.
Yes.
Hopefully we've communicated our needs. And we
Uh,
also feel connected because someone's heard us, we've
yes.
processed our emotions, um,
Yes.
and sat with that experience. Yeah.
Yes, and I think you've just given a beautiful kind of take on emotions. And from an evolutionary perspective, they're a means of survival.
Mm.
Right? Things like feeling shame, and shame kind of gets a bad rap, but shame has also been adaptive from a
Yep.
evolutionary perspective. It makes us come back into the fold if we sit with that in an adaptive way. And emotions typically serve an adaptive purpose, right?
Yeah.
And as you said, it makes us access an action tendency here. So we do something that helps us survive and thrive in our worlds and in our interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, totally. So I guess the real struggle that people then come to is, obviously we're not in caveman anymore.
No.
Maybe there's not a big scary monster in front of me,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, there's fear that bubbles up. Or maybe my anger is really big and maybe it's not matching the thing that's happening in front of me.
Yeah.
And that whole thing. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so we things have may have changed from, I guess, big scary dinosaurs or back in the caveman day, but people experience, I guess, big scary things on a daily here for their own interpersonal worlds.
Mhm.
And for them, sometimes they could have an initial reaction to something,
Mhm.
and it may be something that may feel quite overwhelming. And that is a what we call a primary emotion. So it's the first emotion that you kind of notice, right, that
Mhm.
emerges for you. And then what can tend to happen for some people is that if that emotion feels like it is quite raw, or it is overwhelming, or it's perhaps has a familiar flavor to it, we
Mhm.
could then mask it with something what's called a secondary emotion, and
Mhm.
it obscures the experience of which we've had of the first emotion. So it's an emotion on an emotion.
Mhm. Maybe it would be worth pausing there for a sec and
Mm,
dig into some maybe examples we might see straight off where our
mm,
theory is, hey, maybe this might be going on, right?
yeah.
So there's lots of oodles of information of
Mm,
people Googling anger management, right?
yes.
I'm angry, or my partner's angry, or they always blow up, or da da da
Mm,
da da. That presentation,
mm,
as soon as they come into the room, is what is going on there? Can you give me a few examples of why you get angry or what that anger kind of looks like as it starts to blow up? Usually, clients might say something like, I go 0 to 10 and there's no in between.
mm,
But usually the first kind of pulling that apart and understanding if it is a secondary emotion problem, layering
mm,
problem,
mm,
usually what we do there is we ask people what their relationship is like with anger.
mm. Yeah, and that gives us a bit of a historical context for it. So, and I'm glad you really named this, Stu, because I do this in my work as well. I ask the questions of how was this kind of held?
Mhm.
So, how did caregivers respond to
Mhm.
anger? And how was this actually perceived? So, how did I perceive anger from my caregivers?
Mhm.
Right. And that gives us such rich information in terms of what that person's relationship with anger may be, and perhaps how it may be influencing their reactions within their relationship, or how they respond to
Mhm.
their partner's anger.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Often when I first started learning about layers of emotions, or layer
Mm,
one and layer two, or primary and secondary,
mm,
is it makes no sense. Why is it secondary when it's the first thing that comes to me, right? Why is
uh-huh,
and the simple way that I've kind of explained it to myself and to clients is
yeah.
primary emotion is the actual closest thing that's going on internally, right?
Yes.
Like that is the
Yes.
closest thing to me. The secondary thing is usually the thing that's happening out there, right? That people
Mm,
see,
mm,
that might other people might have problems with, that
mm,
people can go, aha, you're an angry person, right? That's
yeah.
your emotion. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and secondary emotions can act as a bit of a protective barrier, not just for our internal world, but
Mhm.
for our external ones as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I tend to reflect as well on sexual stereotypes. So, for instance,
Mhm.
typically with men, there's a lot of discomfort sitting with perhaps primary fear or primary shame.
Mhm.
And so, what would perhaps cover that from the discomfort would be something like anger. And
Mhm.
that's quite typically seen in sexual stereotypes. And for women,
Yeah.
in sexual stereotypes, there, you may see them crying as they're kind of expressing anger. And that's because perhaps of the socialization as to
Mm.
anger being perceived as negative or a negative trait for a woman to show,
Yeah.
right? But really, anger is that primary emotion there. But perhaps the secondary is this feeling of shame
Yeah.
around what may be coming up.
Yeah, and we just have to go back a generation or even our childhood maybe
Hmm.
where there's this, boys don't cry or,
Yes.
stop crying. What are you whinging about? Like,
Mm.
be a tough boy, grow, be big, right?
Mm.
Not to throw my mum under the bus here for a second, but she used to say, it's time for you to go and like go out and go camping and stuff. And I'm like, well, no, like that's not me. Why are you
Yeah.
throwing that out to me? Why is that something you think
Yeah.
is important to me,
Yeah.
even though I have a penis, even though I
Yes.
identify as being male? And
Yeah.
and that's this bigger tapestry, this bigger picture here of expectations on gender and how that plays out,
Yeah.
but all of us generally about emotions, right?
Yes, I'm really glad you named that as well. It's this sense of talking more about emotions, and I guess our parents or their parents before them, emotions wasn't really something that was talked about, and cognitive behavioral therapy
Mhm.
has been quite predominant in the mental health field. So it's almost like emotions are kind of this secondary weather thing that happens. Whereas now research that has come out, particularly with pioneers such as Leslie Greenberg and Robert Elliott, that's showing that it's actually a real kind of primary thing that we're needing to attend to is our emotions. It serves a real evolutionary adaptive process so that we could function within society and that we could actually be regulated.
Mhm. Yeah. And yeah, I think that there can be this real clash. I'm going to go into Psychland a little bit here in terms of
Yeah,
psychology and different theories for a second. Just
yeah.
hold on to me if you
Okay.
fast forward this if you don't want to listen. But there is a real clash between cognitive behavior therapy or ACT, so acceptance commitment therapy, about their view of emotions just being a thing we push through or we ride the wave and then it eventually settles, but we shouldn't actually put much weight to it. We shouldn't put much value to it. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got people like ourselves, emotion focused therapy, or people that might do more kind of psychotherapy, somatic type work in the counseling area really believe or really push the idea that our emotions are important. We just need a better relationship with them. We
Yes.
just need to tune in better. We just need to build that bridge of not pushing everything away and understand the why.
Yeah.
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 And Mel Robbins, if you're listening, that let them theory, I actually want to do a dedicated episode on some of the issues that simple psychological fads ignore or oversimplify that actually doesn't help lots of different people with trauma, layers of emotions,
Mhm.
or intensity of emotion. You can't just unhook yourself from an intense thing. You can't just kind of back away and just pretend it's a thing. There's clearly a deeper story going on here.
Yeah. And for particularly with perhaps clients who do have a lot of emotional layers,
Yep.
and clients who do live with trauma,
Yep.
that perhaps may be a mitigating of their experiences. But I understand that some of that let them theory works for some people, and that's great. And I'm a big believer in that everyone should find what's right for them.
Hmm.
As an emotion focused therapist, I'm more so. interested in working with the emotion rather than the cognition
Mhm.
behind it, and to support my clients in that way so that they feel heard in their lived experiences and that the emotions behind that are validated.
Mm, yeah, exactly. So there could be a number of reasons why that second layer of that external presentation of that
Mm,
automatic emotion comes out. So
mm,
one is, just for example,
mm,
uh, it's too hard for me to show fear, right? I
yeah.
don't want to throw that out to the world because I don't want to be seen as a wimp
Mm,
or too weak
mm,
or, unable to express that because I think someone will shut me down or dismiss me. Now,
mm,
let's think of a really simple scenario. Driving in my car and obeying the laws and driving at speed, etc. And some asshole speeds in front of me and pushes their way in and almost, I almost run into them.
yeah.
Sometimes automatically I go to F you.
Yeah.
What the fuck are you doing? Da, 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 da,
Uh-huh.
da, 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 and screaming at the top of my lungs and
Uh-huh.
da, 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 da,
Yeah.
da. But actually, I'm actually scared. I'm actually scared I'm
Yeah.
gonna run into an accident, you know,
Mm,
car crash and I can't recover and horrible, 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 right?
yes.
But my initial out there to the world response is anger. That's a secondary presentation of
Yes.
an emotion.
Yes, most definitely. And there's also, as we're talking about emotions, there's also for secondary emotions what we call undifferentiated emotions.
Hmm.
And for undifferentiated emotions, it's emotions like anxiety, where it's almost like there's this cluster of enmeshed emotions that's going on, and it feels like that there's this global distress coming as well.
Hmm.
Right? Working with anxiety is typically what some people, a lot of my clients actually bring in terms of what I notice and what they tend to notice through our work as this kind of secondary emotion before dropping into the deeper pain that they may have.
Yeah, yeah. And so, whether you believe in the let them theory in terms of disconnecting from that emotion, part of the theory of that I actually accept is sometimes things are too intense, right?
Mm,
Sometimes we actually need to regulate ourselves and
mm,
slow the intensity down
mhm.
so we can understand it better, so we
Yes.
can, take a few minutes to settle ourselves, reassure ourselves we're
Mhm,
safe, etc., and then reconnect. That's the big difference between,
mhm.
CBT and emotion focus is we want to actually connect with it, but in safety, in this
Yeah.
more regulated space.
That's right. That's right. And try and get into our bodies or build safety in our bodies to be able to access and sit with those emotions in more regulated state.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so one is I feel I can't be scared because I don't want to appear weak.
Mhm.
Or there might be another example where you actually haven't had much time to know what sadness feels like on the inside,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we skip past that very quickly, and
Mm.
therefore it's hard to, where does sadness sit in my body?
Yeah.
How does it actually feel? And do I suppress that, really quickly?
Mm. And it's almost like we're doing a bit of a body scan and what
Mhm.
we like to call in the work a bit of focusing. So we
Mhm.
notice what may come up in our body and what we're feeling, and we may
Yep.
have some visualization around that. And it's
Mhm.
almost this gentle startup in terms of getting the language around what may be emerging for us.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a really nice synergy between this podcast and the Tuning Into Teens
Mm,
podcast, and that's why I wanted to bring that up today, is a lot of teenagers are blowing up like volcanoes,
mm,
losing their shit over something that maybe parents don't understand.
mm,
But sometimes, maybe not all the time, but sometimes it's actually needed to put the rules aside,
mhm,
put the waving finger and say aside
mhm,
and go, instead of go to your room, etc. Maybe it's like, whoa, this is really big. Like, that you're blowing up. There's something going on here,
Mhm.
but I need to sit in your corner. I need to understand it. You can't be disrespectful to me. You can't, tell me to fuck
Mhm.
off.
Mhm.
But clearly there's more here that I want to sit next to you with.
Yeah, and it's that level of parenting, or I guess that acceptance of a lot of empathy around that
Mm-hmm.
child's emotions or that teen's emotions,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a valid experience of their world.
Mm,
And sometimes when the finger does get waved, and this even happens with adults in their perhaps
mm-hmm.
relationships or with their own caregivers, even as adults, sometimes it could feel like that I'm misunderstood or that my experiences aren't valid,
Mm-hmm.
which causes a lot of emotional pain, perhaps for that person,
Yeah.
and a lot of distress.
Yeah, so I guess naming a few of these examples kind of really paint a picture out there to listeners and watchers that it can present quite differently. And the other kind of yucky thing about secondary emotions is usually they hang around.
Mm,
Usually they're kind of this lingering thing. We can't
mm,
relax. We can't,
mhm,
enjoy the rest of our day.
mm.
It's very hard to connect or maybe socialize with other people because we've got this thing that is yuck.
Yeah, and with the secondary emotions, it's exactly what you said at the beginning, where that's the thing that people are facing. That's what's
Yeah.
being presented to people. So people are working with what they're being presented with, right? And they're attuning to what they're being presented with, unknowingly that you may be feeling something completely different. And whether
Mm,
that's unknowingly even to yourself,
yeah.
right? There may be something emerging for you. And that brings me on to primary maladaptive emotions, which I feel
Mm,
like are quite important for us to touch on as well. And I know that we touched on this in another episode too, but just a
mm,
little bit of a rehash for those
mm,
listening. For primary maladaptive emotions, it perhaps doesn't meet that need as we've been talking about at the beginning of this episode. So,
mm,
primary adaptive emotions meeting needs, allowing us to thrive and survive in the world.
mm,
With primary maladaptive emotions, they tend to come up from what we call historical wounds,
mm,
attachment based needs that were unmet.
mm,
It can come along with unprocessed emotion as well. So just say that um, for instance, with a friend that you may have at school, and we'll use this because, again, we're promoting teens here
mm,
just for the moment. With teens, if you have a friend at school and a friend just say plays around with you and teases you, the adaptive emotion that would come up for you would be anger,
mm,
right? Because they've clearly broken trust with you, they've broken a boundary, right? And so showing anger in an assertive way, which perhaps sounds like, I don't appreciate you calling me names or you
mm,
hitting me, you
mm,
know, instead of it being, if it was named like that, and the friend didn't accept that or perhaps ridiculed them even further,
mm,
that could cause something what's called a emotional wound,
mm,
which causes core pain. And it's
mm.
almost like that anger then doesn't become processed. Although we
Yep.
named it, it wasn't validated by in our interpersonal relationship with that person. And
Mm,
so what happens then when we're adults is that when we interact with someone in the workplace and there's that familiar vibe where people are joking around, perhaps around a work desk and making fun,
mhm,
the instant reaction may be this kind of anger,
mm,
right? Because it's trying to have this the same thing.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. There's a thread that is continuing there.
Mm,
And yeah, here's your colleagues just having a laugh or,
mm,
yeah, kind of saying something that everyone's laughing and you're not. And that's
mm.
creating that very similar pattern. That's,
Yes,
you're being transported back to younger you
yes,
who
yes,
experienced that bullying, who experienced that
yes,
yucky.
yes.
Yeah.
But instead of it being adaptive anger, it may come up as maladaptive anger, where it
Yeah.
may be more aggressive or more rejective when you
Yeah.
notice those behaviors with work colleagues.
Yeah. So back to primary and
Ah,
secondary. There's a primary anger, but there's also a secondary anger that,
yes,
there's something else going on there which kind of
yes.
doubles it, right?
Hmm.
Doubles that presentation to the world. and you might think later, you might talk to your partner when you get home, you're like, I really lost it towards those people. Like it just doesn't make sense
Uh-huh.
why it was such a big explosion.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you're exactly right. It's almost doubling that anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's making sense of the experience too, which is what we do here with our emotion focused therapists and those trained in it, myself as and
Mhm.
yourself, Stu, as well. You know,
Mhm.
we sit with that and we work through what was happening for you in that moment. Where perhaps did you go?
Mhm.
Right? Where were you perhaps taken back to? And we do that in a nice, gentle, and safe way and bring that experience back so that we could relive it in a different way and replace that maladaptive emotion with a more adaptive function,
Mhm.
adaptive purpose.
The other thing, just to kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works,
Mm,
is also interruptions of emotions,
mm,
right? And that can be an interesting one, particularly with people who might start to feel something
mm,
and then it's shut off, right? So
mm,
there's an interruption of
mm,
that
mm,
emotion happening,
mm.
or maybe they're not feeling much at all. Maybe
Yeah.
they walk around in life not feeling much joy, not
Mm,
feeling much anger or sadness or any of
yeah.
it,
Mhm.
and they actually don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so with interruptions, interruptions are typically a protective process that
Mhm.
could happen for people where the emotion that's being felt may be too strong,
Yeah.
or maybe there's a lot of distress or discomfort that comes from feeling this emotion.
Yeah.
And so, what interruptions tend to, I guess, assist with, but not in an adaptive way, because it holds what that emotional need is at bay.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of soothes it by keeping it all under wraps.
Mm-hmm.
But what keeps happening is that when you enter the environment and that emotion gets elicited again, it's almost like the cyclical pattern that occurs throughout this person's life.
Yeah. Yeah. And so part of that
Mm,
shutdown, part of that thing that takes over or stops it, pauses
yeah,
it, also has a narrative of
that's right.
mum and dad are too busy,
Hmm.
or they've got too much on their plate,
Hmm.
or, I don't want to fall apart because that's really scary.
Hmm. And perhaps that person at a younger age would have relied on that other part there.
Yeah.
Right? It was useful once upon a time, but perhaps in the relationships or interpersonal interactions they get in the future, perhaps it doesn't serve the same purpose.
Hmm.
And when we talk about interruption, this is exactly what you said, Stu, about that sense of shutting down or
Hmm.
that sense of perhaps not knowing what we feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're really linking if a primary emotion is kind of bubbling.
Hmm.
uh, That's good. We need to first develop a relationship, settle it down. Like back to
Hmm.
our emotional scale, I did a little tool related to 0 to 10.
Yeah.
If you can kind of get that level down to
Mm.
say a 4 or a 5, so feel it, don't push it away, feel
Yeah.
it, but it's
Hmm.
less intense.
Yeah.
Then we're kind of tuning into what's going on, why is
Hmm.
that bubbling, what
Hmm.
is that emotion trying to tell us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it helps us develop the language around it so that we could actually meet that emotion-based need.
Hmm.
So again, if it's fear, fear dictates that we need safety.
Hmm.
So what is it that I'm needing in my interpersonal relationship or whatever I presented to therapy with, where I'm needing to be safe? And is that primary? And again, this is all through that exploration. Is that fear primary
Hmm.
or is it something that's secondary?
That's the kind of pulling all those threads together. That's our aim. But I want to kind of stress to people that might be listening or watching that this takes time to build, right? The concepts
Yes.
we're talking about here can be complicated, especially if you haven't built a big relationship
Mm,
with your internal world emotions.
mm,
This takes time,
mm,
but it's a really big kind of explanatory thing of why people might be blowing up, why people might be, hanging around with these bad smells that's hard to get rid of. Um, a quick little anecdote. My record, I'm not sure, I shouldn't say it like that, but I will. My record for someone kind of just, tears, right, is I met a tradie and never done counseling before. His partner was pushing him to counseling. And he sat down and he said, "Look, I'm just angry all the time, and I'm just freaking out and blowing up at my partner, and everything is shit, everything's fucked up."
Mhm.
And I said, okay, that's interesting."
Right.
And then I said, "I don't actually, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I don't know whether you're actually an angry guy or are you a hurt guy?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Here is this person, this client, holding on and all this stuff just bubbling up that
Mm.
they didn't even know what to do with.
Mhm.
They had this kind of track record of anger and they just kept
Mhm.
following that.
Mhm.
But they felt so isolated because they couldn't share with their partner.
Mm.
They didn't have the words for it. And right in front of me, they just needed to just let go.
Yeah. And how healing and how beautiful that it was. And this is a prime example of seeing the primary emotion, even though perhaps there isn't that language. I'm not sure if this was just the first session, but not having the language, but at least instead of the anger being secondary, you really went to that primary. And
Yeah.
you sounds like you really brought him into a beautiful place of vulnerability that you held him in.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
sounds like he was really seen.
Yeah. So that's kind of our aim, not to make everyone cry,
No.
but if that happens, we have tissues. Uh, but there's clearly a need for vulnerability, and so safety, yes, but
Mm.
vulnerability also to get to the core of what's going on, and even what the person is missing, right?
Mhm.
Because, like we said at the very start, if we're scared, we need to connect to safety.
Yeah.
If we're angry, usually 99 times out of 10, there is some unfair bubbling stuff where
Mm.
we just feel like we're hitting our heads against a brick wall and
Mhm.
nobody's listening.
Mm.
That's really shitty.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And again, going straight to that primary, because if you would have stuck with that anger, you
Mm,
know, that would have been a completely different session, and perhaps it wouldn't have brought him to that place.
maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Or maybe there was a more primary anger of
Yeah.
nobody cares. Nobody
Yeah.
gives a fuck, you know?
Yeah.
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 All right, so let's do a recap because we're talking about a lot of language here and a lot of new ideas for people. Emotions, important, we need them.
Mm-hmm.
But first, we need to start to build a relationship with them, turn the intensity down,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have a bit more of a better spot, a safer spot to understand what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Two, we have two layers or kind of two quite basic ideas related to primary emotions and secondary emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And often we jump to secondary emotions because we feel we can't show the primary one. We can't
Yeah.
show fear, we can't show sadness because of external stuff that we've grown up with.
Mm-hmm.
Mum, dad, tell me to shut up. So
Mm-hmm.
I won't show my sadness,
Mm-hmm.
or that there's this build up that goes on that stops us sharing that. And then we hinted at interruptions, other stuff that might get in the way, or a historical thing that
Mm-hmm.
makes you go numb. So it's different to a secondary emotion. It's more, I'm not feeling things. I'm shut off from what's going on
Yeah.
in here. Yeah, cool. Um, and I guess to kind of wrap all this up too, life and mental health in a general, saying something really generally here, mental health is complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, if we're a fully fledged human and we can access our primary emotions and sit and do that, great. But other stuff gets in the way. It could be other mental health stuff, e.g., you have bipolar or anxiety that might get in the
Mm,
way and kind of
mm,
distort what's going on. It's hard to
mm,
access that.
mhm.
Or trauma, that your
Yeah.
body is just so overwhelmed
Mhm.
and your body is just so used to seeing that beast in the jungle. It's
Yes.
very hard to turn that intensity down.
Yes. And it perhaps skews or obscures your internal emotional compass.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's very important when working with things like bipolar or trauma,
Mhm.
that we do that in a very safe way and that we uh, get a relationship with just talking about certain aspects, then bring it into the body
Yeah.
eventually, but it being a slow process.
Yeah, yeah. And when we're dealing with other humans,
Mm,
sometimes it's very hard to share how we feel.
yeah.
Maybe we haven't done that before, or we feel that it doesn't land well when we try to approach our partner or family member, or
Yeah.
even counselors get it wrong, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, there's this other barrier, there's this external barrier going on to dig, sit, process.
Mm,
If you're listening today, watching this episode, let's do a check-in, right? So I just want everyone to just take a deep breath and just check in from the top of your head, down through your neck, down through your chest, your shoulders, the rest of your body, and just notice. You might be feeling a bit edgy. You might be feeling a bit buzzed because you had a busy day. You might feel a bit buzzed because there's coffee running through your veins like me. Just take a minute and explore. And if even if that feels just a bit funny, that's okay. We're just checking in. We're just tuning in and seeing, observing what's going on. And that is kind of step one of what is going on. And you then might need to go use our emotional tool and slow that down because you found something, or maybe you don't really notice anything. That's okay too. We're
mhm,
just starting to explore here. We're just starting to ask the questions, throw the questions out there, and then it's up to you. Do you need some extra help? Is it very tricky for you to express what's going on for you, or maybe you haven't really done that checking in before? That's all okay. That's what counseling support is about. And it's actually further to that is you feeling more connected with yourself, getting your needs met, addressing what's going on there, and you feeling also more connected with the people around you. Great. Cool. So thank you, Daniel. I love having our chats together. It feels like it flows. I don't even have to have,
yes.
points down. We just flow. So that's lovely.
Yes. It's shared as well, Stu. Thank you again for having me on. Such amazing work, and to give this information and platforms to people is great. So thank you once again for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And please like and share and subscribe. I need to start to get used to this. I've done a few episodes now, so bear with me on that. And if you have someone in your life that does get angry, share this.